Hey, yo, Pete Produce here once again, and the old league is gone, my hair is gone, so it's time for a new league, new build, and this is a sneak peek of what I'm doing. This is my league starter, Lightning Conduit Trickster, and I want to this is not going to be a build guide, but I will explain why I do things and how I do things and what this is. So Lightning Conduit, if someone doesn't know yet, it's a skill that requires a shock to be present on the enemy for you to be able to do damage. And for that purpose, we have Orb of Storms with Overcharge, Chain, Unbound Elements. This allows us to have big shocks, Chain, paired with Shock Proliferation Mastery, covers pretty much the whole screen if enemies are tightly packed, right? You just cast it once, cast Lightning Conduit, boom, the whole thing is gone. The whole screen is gone. Well, not the screen. The screen is still there, but the enemies are gone, right? So this is very nice for clear, for single target. It should be bueno. And every time you cast Lightning Conduit, the Orb of Storms will zap the enemy, inflict another shock, and you can do damage again and again and again, and you can scale your cast speed and never lose out on damage, right? Because, for example, with Stormbrand, you would apply the Stormbrand and it zaps a lot slower, so you could cast Lightning Conduit fast, but your Stormbrand starts lagging behind and it will stop applying shocks. So the cool thing is, this build has very nice baseline speed, it has very nice access to damage, pretty easy scaling of damage as well. Then we have, I mean, the defenses are not amazing, right? This is nothing cracked. This is, however, without a guard skill. The main weakness of this setup is the physical damage, and there are ways to increase this number so that we are tankier, but that requires more investment and whatnot. And yeah, so that's for later. But to begin with, let's talk about the Ascendancy. I will start with the one step ahead as my first Ascendancy point. The action speed, 8%, increased action speed. This is so nice. It's like an elevated, almost like an elevated tailwind effect on your boots. And for anyone that's played with this, it's just bueno. Juicy. Nearby enemy monster action speed is at most 92% of base value. Is also very nice. Defensively, it slows them down. So it's, you know, better for us. Then the other one, the second one, would be Polymath. This gives us recovery while mapping, gives us damage for each mastery that we take, each unique mastery, right? It's a very nice, very nice, actually, Ascendancy. Then I will go for Escape Artist to be able to double dip into Evasion and Energy Shield on my gear. And then lastly, Soul Drinker gives the Leech, gives the attack and cast speed, which is always nice. And then Overleech for Energy Shield, which means that we can be at full Energy Shield and still Leech Energy Shield, which enables the Energy Shield Leech support gem at its maximum efficiency, right? We can get both the benefits, both the effects at once, which is not always there, right? It's not always there, but when it's there, it's giga cracked. And then because Lightning Conduit cannot inflict shock by itself, Elemental Focus is just a natural component of the build. Increased damage, increased critical strikes, inspiration. We need the inspiration for mana cost reduction. Mana cost is going to be an issue. You definitely want to focus on betrayal or buy the crafts from other people. But if you're going SSF, which I'm not, but I advertise this as SSF friendly because it is, I'll be going for this myself. And then you craft both rings and the amulet with -7 mana cost, and then you're Gucci. Then you are Gucci. You can sustain and you can get a lot of cast speed, and it's fine. If you cannot get those crafts, right, there's always, well, first of all, not going into a 6-link, because, you know, 6-link shouldn't happen too early. Especially if you don't have the crafts, you shouldn't go for a 6-link. Let's just say that, right? But then, yeah, if you need some more help, you can go for Eldritch Battery early on. You're definitely gonna go for a Mana Flask early on. You could drop, for example, Haste, which sucks big time, but you could drop Haste and go for Grace, which reserves the same amount, but, you know, gives you more tankiness and reduces the mana cost per second because you have less cast speed. But it kind of sucks. I'm not a huge fan of this, but that's an option. And then another option would be to go for Discipline, which adds more tankiness for hits, and then instead of reservation efficiency, go for reduced mana cost. That is potentially probably the best solution if you're willing to drop Haste. If you're not, then, well, you'll have to figure things out with the Mana Flasks and Mana Crafts and whatever, right? For Flasks, I have Jade Flask, I have a Silver Flask for some zoomies, I have a Quicksilver Flask for also zoomies, And then Diamond Flask. This is important that you only have one flask with chance to gain a flash charge when you deal a critical strike, because it has a global cooldown. So if you have multiple flasks, then all of them share the cooldown and you can't sustain any of them. But if you have one flask, you can sustain one flask, and then this allows us to cap crit chance. Juice. The gear is nothing spectacular. A little bit of cast speed on the rings, and then you just get life. Resists. Yeah, it's pretty simple. If you can get regen somewhere, it would be nice, because the build definitely would be nicer if you have regen. It's not necessary, but it's nice, right? It's a quality of life thing. For the gems, we have Arcanist Brand with Assassin's Mark and Wave of Conviction. Later on, you could drop Wave of Conviction if you have Awakened Lightning Penetration, which I don't have even in my Links Lightning Penetration. But if you have a lot of crit multi, then you can drop crit damage, and then it, Awakened Lightning Penetration. I mean, Awakened Added Lightning is even better, but Awakened Lightning Penetration would allow you to get lightning exposure on hit. So maybe you would swap around to 2 gems, but that would allow you to drop that, open up a socket, maybe even 2, depends on what you decide to go for. Then we have Conductivity with Arcane Surge. One thing why it's separate, why it's not in a 4-link with the Arcanist Brand, is because, one, it costs a lot of mana, so if you just keep it on the Arcanist Brand and constantly keeps casting and casting and casting, right, you will run out of mana, and that is not good. You cannot do that because you cannot do damage if you don't have mana. And then the other thing, we need to activate Arcane Surge. We have to proc Arcane Surge with something, and this is the best thing because it's the most expensive skill that we cast, and it's also very fast to cast. Conductivity, I mean, curses in general have very, well, pretty low cast time, and then we have a lot of cast speed, so it just doesn't feel bad at all to cast this. And it's AoE, you don't have to, you don't really miss it, like it's totally chill. And then you proc this, and it's juicy, right? It gives a mana regen, gives cast speed, more damage. Well, more damage doesn't get more damage, but more damage as in like more cast speed equals more damage. Okay, then, as I said, the haste could be dropping that for grace or discipline, but haste ideally because of the zoomies. I prefer the zoomies. We have Petrified Blood to go low life, Wrath, a lot of damage because it's a pure lightning build. Then Arrogance, Clarity, Arctic Armor. You want to be stationary to dish out the most amount of damage. This is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, most builds want to be stationary, right? And then Arctic Armor is a big help because physical max hit is our weakest link. So adding this is pretty good, right? And then Clarity, we need the regen, so this is important. You have to try and get it as high as possible without breaking your reservation, right? You don't want to go below 50 reservation, and you can see it here if I increase the level. So you lose the unreserved, right? Life recoverable. If that disappears, that means that there is no difference. Like, you reserve more than 50 and there's no gap and you don't get the overleech and you become squishier. The whole Petrified Blood shebang, right? So in this POB, without getting too much life on items, level 94, level 10 Clarity seems like the play. It could be, you know, a few levels lower, it could be a few levels higher. You could actually get more life on the gear very easily. So this should be higher, not lower, but if you have to go, you can go lower, right? Then we have Frostblink, Leap Slam. The cool thing with this build is that you can actually be flexible with the weapons. You don't have to go for Scepters. I prefer going for Scepters with Leap Slam because, well, it's nice. But then if you have low attack speed on Scepters, it's not going to be as fast. So it might not feel that great, but Karui Scepters have 1.5 base attack speed, which is the highest one. So if you can get Karui Scepters with decent mods, that's great. Another option that I was going for was Singularity, right? It's very cheap. It's a very cheap weapon. It gives you reduced mana cost, so it helps out early on as well. Yeah, it's great, but it's pretty slow, so Leap Slam is not going to be as great with these weapons, but the damage is nice. It's very cheap, as I said. Then again, like, these weapons are also nothing really. So yeah. As for the tree, the important things to mention here are the reservation, right? The reservation mastery for life reservation. Without this, you won't be able to reserve everything that I need to reserve. Or you need to reserve, we need to reserve. It's our build, right? Then this is not really important, but it's a good damage node. This is important, right? The Corrupting Blood, so that you don't have to worry about that. We can take these nodes, and this gives us poison avoidance, bleed avoidance. On our boots, we have avoid bleed on the implicit, I believe it's better than avoid poison because we already have some chance to avoid poison. We don't have to avoid all poison because one poison stack doesn't usually kill you, right? One bleed can kill you, but one poison or even 5 poisons probably won't kill you. It's when you stack up a lot of them, that's when you tend to die. But if you have some chaos res, you have some chance to avoid poisons. As long as you have complete bleed immunity, that's the big thing. And I believe we are, yeah, 95%. You can see here, right? It's 95%, which is not complete immunity. So ideally you would want to get a bit of a higher tier of the Eldritch Implicit for the avoid bleed. And then you're chilling. We want to go for... Oh, of course, this is very important. Automatic chest opening. But also this, the Caster Mastery that gives you cast speed for every non-instant skill that you've used cast, doesn't matter, the same thing. Used or cast recently, right? This gives a lot of damage, a lot of cast speed. It's very, very strong. Yeah, crit chance, shock spread. This thing, 10% of Leech is instant. This one's actually very nice. It increases our sustain by quite a substantial amount. So going for this, it's not necessarily like a super important thing, but it's definitely a good thing. So in red maps, you probably want to go for this for better sustain. The recoup is important for Petrified Blood. You really want this because with Petrified Blood, if you don't have a lot of regen, which we don't, I mean, we will have Overleech at some point, but until then, you won't have a lot of regen, or any regen for that matter. You won't have the leech, the overleech. So recoup is going to be humongous so that you don't feel miserable playing with low life Petrified Blood. The Reservation Mastery, right? Yep, Life Mastery, because we can do this. We don't need any... Well, we don't use any life mods on the body armor. We scale into Evasion Energy Shield from the Ascendancy. So we want to go for the hybrid. And then open prefix, ideally, to craft the fizz damage mitigation. One thing to note, so my plan is, this is level 68 tree, and this is pretty much once we're done with acts and we're ready to go into maps, right? Level 68 is around that point. Depends on the player, but yeah, I already took this. Is debatable. You could go for the recoup instead. Could be potentially better. Actually, that's probably better. That's probably better because I don't have life leech at this point, so going for a regen and recoup is better. And then right, so once you have this point taken, or these points taken, you want to go towards crit. And the first thing that I would recommend going for is Disciple of the Forbidden, because it gives you power charge on kill, amongst of course the other good things that you get here, crit chance, mana regen, crit multi. But this is how you get power charges early on. And then the other thing that allows you to sustain on single target is Assassin's Mark quality, right? Just default quality. It allows you to get charges on a hit, on a single target, on a boss rather. Yeah, so this is the first investment into crit, and then you just path through the crit nodes and whatever you can see in the POB. The early steps of the POB, of the build, is just playing with Spark. You go for Pierce. You actually get this as a level 4 reward as a Trickster, so you don't have to mule it. But I do have this whole note section. Well, it's not too big, it's not a book, right? It's not too overwhelming. It's just what you get for free, so that you don't need to buy these things, what you need to buy from the vendor. And I just quickly, inserted Start Templar to mule Holy Flame Totem. That's the only thing that you cannot get on a Trickster for this leveling, and it's actually pretty impactful. The regen, the additional damage, it's definitely worth the muling. Also, you have another chance at getting a 3-link, right? You can check the vendors for a 3-link. Maybe you drop it as well while you're going to complete the Mud Flask quest and the Chicken quest. You check the movement speed boots. You also get a gear set that you can vendor if nothing works for you. And then you get some wisdom scrolls, which you can actually use to identify stuff, to buy stuff. So muling one character for something is actually definitely worth it, no matter what you're playing. Unless you don't need anything, then it's debatable. You probably don't want to waste time, but it still could be useful, right? I will be leveling with, early on, weapon swapping into daggers or swords, and then whirling blading, and then weapon swap back, cast my stuff, weapon swap, whirling blades, weapon swap, cast my stuff. It sounds a bit annoying. It is a bit annoying. Later on, though, from Act 3, we get the crafted damage on daggers or swords, depends on what you get. I will be trying to get the fastest attack speed weapons, so it could be claws, it could be daggers. Well, daggers, no. It could be claws or thrusting swords. They can go up to 1.6 attack speed per second. Not per second. Well, yeah, attack speed per second. 1.6 base attack speed, basically. And it feels very nice once you go to get to that point where you don't have to weapon swap, right? You just cast Whirling Blades, then it becomes really nice. Yeah, don't rush into the Lightning Conduit swap. I recommend going for at least level 45, level 46, somewhere around that level, because at that point you will be able to get a decent amount of cast speed. You will have a 100% chance to shock on your Aura of Storms, which again, here in the notes, I cover how to get a 100% chance early on, because it's not the same as in the endgame. And I did a few runs. It's pretty smooth, honestly. Like, I did get a little bit overwhelmed at first. I didn't click a lot. I kept forgetting, for example, Sniper's Mark, you just have to click it once on the boss early on, right? It's from level 4. But like on Merveil, for example, you just click it once and then it's just there for the whole fight. And I forgot. I did like 3 or 4 runs and I just forgot. Player bad. Anyway, it's smooth, but yeah, it's smooth. It is smooth. I tried leveling with Ignite as well, and it is smoother for clear because Ignite Prolif is just like the best thing. But then you have to get different socket colors, you have to get more gems, you have to buy more stuff from vendors, so you need more chance orbs, you need more wisdom scrolls. It's fine, it's manageable, but it's not the best. And by going for Spark, it's actually pretty strong. Like, single target wise, it's pretty strong. The clear lacks a little bit early on with Spark, so that's the downside of it. But then overall, you have to respec less. Gear wise, it's pretty much the same. Like color wise, weapon wise, damage wise, right? It's same curses, so it's nicer. Just like smoother transition, not necessarily smoother gameplay, but smoother transition into the later stages of the build. So I decided to go for that, and I would recommend going for that. I'm really excited about this build. It should be amazing, it should be great, it should be well-rounded. I guess I could cover one more thing, which is potentially what I'm going for later in the game. So I could respec into Suppression and more invested. It's definitely going to be more investment, but also SSF possible, doable. It will take a bit more time, but it's doable, right? So we lose a little bit of damage. We invest a little bit more into crit chance on the weapons so that we can craft, or rather we can drop these points. They give us crit, actually quite a bit of crit here. The Mastery is 60%. This thing is 100%, right? So we do need to cover a decent amount of crit. But then if we can do that, we can drop those points, go into Suppression, change the Ascendancy point one step ahead into Spellbreaker, which adds Sustain, Defense, and Suppression, right? It definitely sucks losing this, but this Ascendancy is not like huge. And one way that we mitigate the loss of it is that we get the boots. We get boots with action speed, right? It's not the same. It's half of the effect, but it's totally fine because it's worth the amount of defense that we get here is substantial enough to sacrifice a bit of speed, I think, and a little bit of damage. And the damage is still like, you know, like the only thing that I changed was crit chance, and I dropped these 2 points for damage. Well, 4 points, but 2 points. Yeah. The defense actually ramps up, and you can get even more damage. Replica Soul Tether actually is pretty important, because without this, you would be taking all of your damage onto Energy Shield, and if we don't have amazing sustain for Energy Shield, so your Energy Shield would be on the lower side, and you could say that you can go for Ghost Dance, but I don't have enough evasion to actually get any significant defense value from Ghost Dance. It would be better. It's like, what, 300? It's maybe, but I don't think that it would really fix anything. I mean, early on, maybe, yeah, but ideally, right, you just go Replica Soul Tether, you split the damage onto Life Energy Shield 50-50, and it helps quite a bit. It also adds a lot of tankiness. Like, if you would look, right, at the belt, the decent belt, nothing crazy, and then this adds so much, like so much. Look, this 1385 Fizz max hit, even if we add endurance charges, is like adding 3 endurance charges, right? So actually really good, because technically it is possible to also add endurance charges into the build. Yeah, the build can ramp a little bit into defenses, but it doesn't need that, you know? It should focus on speed and damage, not becoming hardcore viable. That's my approach, at least, you know. So this is my aspiration in the early late game, but honestly, I might not even go for this tankier version. I maybe will consider going into self-chill for even more zoomies and more damage. And it's also more defense, or well, defense-wise it would be evened out, because Call of the Void would add chill, and then enemies would do 15% reduced damage to me. So dropping some life and whatnot, it wouldn't be a problem, right? Anyway, that's the build, that's the plan. This is the idea of a league starter that I cooked up. I think it's actually gonna be doable very, very nicely. SSF friendly and all that stuff. Hope you enjoyed if you play it. Anyway, but yeah, if you're interested, if you want to follow along, come on Twitch. I will be streaming on League Start. I hope you have a wonderful League Start and a wonderful league. And until next time, ciao.